So I begin with a summary of last session. I have to say, okay. Last time I started the last chapter, which is this chapter about philosophy of culture.
No, you have to do.
Yeah, but I have to got it. So that's it. Yeah, now it's. So it's a chapter about philosophy of culture. So as I want to locate philosophy of science in the framework of philosophy of culture. And in my view, a philosophy of culture should perceive and understand the heterogeneity of culture. It should not deny such heterogeneity, or it should not neglect it, focusing rather on a prior unity of reason. So then I told last time that there are two ways of looking philosophically at culture. The first one follows the impulse of the etymology with the Latin colere, which means producing activity whose basic model is agricultural work, but we may shift the notion of colere to any symbolic production, giving rise to symbolic sediments. So that's the first approach. Oh, I have problems with moving. I don't know why. I had this already, and I don't know how to solve it. Yeah, now I solved it. So the second approach is to see culture as that which provides us with infinite paths. Thanks to culture, we may have lives vectorized towards ideal poles. That's the normative approach of culture. And I'm going to redefine it further in personal terms. So then I asked, why should we bother with philosophy of culture? And the first reason I thought of was that we wish an open rationalism, which means a kind of rationalism considering in a fair way any part of human experience, especially those parts which do not belong to the theoretical layer. So open rationalism should not look down to any part of human experience, considering it as less than logical. So, but even if we keep the logical arrogance, we need a philosophy of culture, because I argued that already the issue of logicism, which is a well-known issue inside theoretical philosophy, requires us to consider mathematics as lived by mathematicians and logic as lived by logicians. I argued that the issue of logicism cannot be narrowed back to a technical issue. So I come back to what motivates the second approach of culture, the approach through the infinite paths provided by culture. I think that we experience that there are a plurality of infinite paths provided by culture, and each of these paths comes with its local legitimacy. And I think this picture is it's just obvious. We know at least the task of truth, which we usually regard as an infinite task, and we know that it is partly institutionalized in science. But the task of truth cannot be reduced to science. It also concerns what happens outside of science, but still science is an important institutionalization of the task of truth. We know also that infinite paths are provided by religions. Art offers another infinite path. It's clear in Nietzsche, for example, because he recommends us to live our lives as artists. And it's for him, it's a never-ending task. And and I was mentioning also love. I'm going to say a bit more about love further. I think also love defines for our individual lives a trajectory of unlimited improvement. So, and then I said that before saying more about this normative facet of culture, I want to present you a short history of philosophy of culture, which is mostly German. So I said some words about hermeneutics, which would be the first important philosophy of culture to my eye. It starts with Schleiermacher, and it continues with Dilthey. And Dilthey famously teaches that culture is something that we have to understand, not to explain, but to understand, which means that we have to understand culture along the lines of motivation. Any district of culture for Dilthey corresponds to a specific local meaning of symbolic activity. So hermeneutics encourages the encyclopedic attitude. We have to try and understand, at least partly, several local meanings. So we cannot be content with knowing very well only one thing, to come back to the distinctions between foxes and hedgehogs. That would be very shortly the teaching of hermeneutics. But I think the encyclopedic attitude is connected with any philosophy of culture, because if you have to avoid looking down to some parts of culture, then you have to be interested in many parts. Then I considered dialectics, and because Hegelianism for sure offers a philosophy of culture, and Hegelianism sees any part of culture, he sees culture on the whole as a kind of journey. It is the journey of concept or of spirit, Begriff oder Geist. And so philosophy of culture has only one job to do. It has to locate every component of culture within the general narrative of the adventure of concept. Then I said some words about the journal Logos, which appeared in Germany between 1910 and 1930 and was officially devoted to philosophy of culture. It was it was meant to be the journal for philosophy of culture. I reminded that famous contributors of the journal were Windelband, Rickert, Simmel, and Weber. So Windelband and Rickert are two neo-Kantians of the South. Some people say sometimes, and then you have Simmel and Weber, who were trying to use philosophical insight in order to create a new discipline, which was sociology. So what was discussed in the journal Logos? People discussed about the tension between culture at the objective level, so would be part of culture all symbolic productions and all symbolic habits, and culture as subjective flourishment. It's the other notion of someone who shows as someone with great culture. So it's the idea that human individuals sometimes manage to flourish at the cultural level by using available sediments. And then I consider another version of philosophy of culture, which is the Marxist one. We know that Marxism brought the opposition between superstructure and infrastructure. Infrastructure is more or less the level of economy, and superstructure would be the level of what is usually described as culture. And Marxist view attributes the determining role to economy, or what is sometimes called in Marxism, political economy, which is a new notion brought by Marx. And it's a philosophy of culture of the cholerae, like Hegelianism is also a philosophy of culture of the cholerae. And the Marxist idea would be that the cholerae is always and before all economical, which means that economy explains culture. And in this Marxist view of the cholerae and of culture, insistence is put on becoming. Culture is seen as something which is always changing, always modifying itself. But this becoming comes through dialectics as the logic of contradiction in Hegel. And in Marx, it proceeds from praxis. And within praxis, the concrete layer of economical production prevails. So then I have to mention the Frankfurt School, because it came after Marx, and in a way, it wanted to take up Marx's critical intention. The authors of the Frankfurt School, so I have in mind here Adorno, Horkheimer, and later on Habermas, they decided to go on with Marx's vision, but they decided to put this vision at the level of the cultural. So they describe social atmosphere, but they locate social atmosphere at the cultural level, at the superstructural level, one could say, remembering Marx. So they brought the stakes of art to the foreground, and in a very famous book co-signed by Adorno and Horkheimer, which the title is The Dialectics of Reason, if I remember well. They emphasized the dominance of instrumental reasoning over true and genuine reason. And in their vision, this corrupts the whole social space. And they don't name it, but I think that most of what they say would apply to a more contemporary vision of the domination of computation culture.
Actually, it's related to what we talked about.
Yeah, it's completely related. So, you know, Frankfurt School's philosophy is often called critical philosophy, and it brings a new style of philosophy of culture. And in this new style of philosophy of culture, critique is a very important feature. Any philosophy of culture has to be a critique of culture and of society. And this is totally confirmed by the famous dispute between Gadamer and Habermas. Because dispute is exactly about this link between philosophy of culture and criticism. Habermas cannot agree with hermeneutical approach of Gadamer because for him, hermeneutical approach puts tradition beyond critical assessment. As Habermas reads hermeneutics, hermeneutics presupposes the absolute value of any tradition. And for that reason, it cannot be critical. And we understand that a good philosophy of culture, according to Frankfurt School, should help criticism of any given contents. It's criticism addressed to anything which is given, or which claims to be given. So I come back on this issue of Frankfurt School's philosophy of culture, because it is mentioned again in the 1979 book, very famous book of Jean-François Lyotard, which is called Postmodern Condition, which was the occasion of a complete misunderstanding of all the readers, almost all the readers. Incredible. because they attributed to Lyotard something which is completely absent of the book. There's no even one mention of it. But it's not important.
So what's the point?
No, the point is that postmodernism is understood as the theory which is that everything is linked with everything, and everything may be interpreted as anything, and everything means anything, and so there is no, it makes a soup of everything. That's postmodernism in the usual discourse. But in postmodern condition, he doesn't speak about that even. And the end of the book claims that we should take the model of scientific behavior, which is completely different from the.
Oh, it's actually the opposite of what people think.
Completely the opposite.
Yeah, but that's because his interpreters did that.
It happens very often, but it's a caricatural case of misreading. Lyotard criticizes Frankfurt School's philosophy of culture because they keep something from Marx, which is subordinating the whole scene of culture to a central determining contradiction. In Marx, the central determining contradiction is the contradiction between bourgeoisie and proletariat. For Frankfurt School, it would rather be the contradiction between instrumental reason and genuine reason. But anyway, we still have this central determining contradiction. And for Lyotard, the option of picturing such a central determining contradiction means that we lose culture's heterogeneity. We mostly view the central contradiction, so we see every component of culture as smoothly deriving from the central contradiction, which brings a kind of unity to all the components. So we don't see any more heterogeneity as inducing a ubiquitous tension between various local standards, which is the idea of heterogeneity. We have an archipelago, to use another of Drew's words, of local standards.
So would Lyotard be okay with having lots of contradictions, or is he also against the idea of a contradiction?
Well, I think that the general Hegelian idea that contradiction is what moves the whole world and the whole being, he's not agreeing with that. But you can trace it back to Heraclitus, because it's the idea that polemos is the father of everything.
Yeah, but my question is because you said Lyotard criticized the Frankfurt School, and you said the Frankfurt School has this one contradiction. So I was wondering whether it's the number of contradictions or contradiction as such that what Lyotard is arguing against.
So I think his picture is rather a tension between local standards.
Tension and contradiction.
It's not a contradiction. It's the tension is simply that you cannot reduce one local standard to another one.
Right.
Sorry.
Contradiction, it means that there is a dynamic, an opposition dynamic.
Okay.
If I were a philosopher of culture, what I am not.
Yeah.
But if I were a philosopher of culture, my fundamental thesis would be that something is culture if and only if, I don't know, defend the right of a working class, I don't know, whatever condition. Any other thing is not culture, any other thing is shit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would deny heterogeneity, but I would be a philosopher of culture, because I observe what is culture and what is not. So I do not see this idea why the philosopher of culture should necessarily receive in itself all the heterogeneity.
That's my requirement, very clearly. So, and you disagree with my requirement, which is not surprising. But I think
no. So you require you.
Yeah, for me, a good philosophy of culture.
Good philosophy.
Something which is sensitive to the heterogeneity. And I explain that because my argument is that we experience the heterogeneity of culture. Deny it is completely absurd, in my view.
Okay, so you are not describing philosophy of culture, we're describing good philosophy of culture.
Yeah, I was telling the history. I mentioned Hegel and hermeneutics and Logos journal. I'm not sure that anything of that is good according to me. But I mentioned the history still.
Jean-Michel, could we describe a bit more the distinction between Gadamer and Habermas? Because I think I belong to the hermeneutic tradition.
Yeah.
And it's based on that we try to understand something.
Yeah.
Okay? So for example, we try to understand Euclid.
Yeah.
What's the difference when we take the critical attitude to such artifacts like it?
I'm not going to be a good advocate of Habermas because I'm rather on the side of Gadamer. So, but he claims that in order to criticize, you have to be able to negate the value of the opponent. And so for him to understand culture, to understand critically culture, to have a good philosophy of culture, it means that we reach the presupposition of any component of culture and we are able to negate these presuppositions. That would be the Habermas view. And then Gadamer rather says that we have to understand it as something which comes from another position than ours. So it's completely different attitude.
What is the central, pardon me, what's the central contradiction?
Yes, in Marx, the central contradiction is the contradiction between bourgeoisie and proletariat. For the Frankfurt School, it would rather be the contradiction between instrumental vision and genuine reason.
Genuine.
So in contemporary terms, it would be contradiction between the computational and the genuine culture.
What are the examples of this genuine culture? Examples of this genuine culture?
No, I think, people are going to say loosely that if we stick to the computational vision of culture, we are never going to understand art, for example.
Yeah, so for example, today with the rise of generative AI, you could say instrumental reason, genuine culture, that's AI generated. I don't know, paintings, music, versus human generated. And then some people say there is no difference, right? So if some people say if the AI can generate music that we enjoy as much as human created music, that's okay, there's no difference. Okay. And then other people say, no, there's a big difference. And we should actually make sure that this difference is visible and maintained, and we should create technology that makes sure that we can keep the two sides apart.
Okay. It was the
so in that sense, I would be on.
It was the issue of the Germinal seminar of Ivan Maigret-Chagnot.
Yeah, I couldn't come because
he was mostly discussing can we accept that how do we define creativity? Mm-hmm. Second, is it possible that an algorithm is showing creativity? And
I mean, technically, it seems
and then he was discussing how could you use algorithms to the benefit of our creativity.
And the conclusion is that in order to use the algorithm in such a way that the algorithm could be creative, you need to be creative.
Yeah,
that is the conclusion.
In a way, I agree with Marco in that case. It was more.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
So Alex and I were talking on the way home last night, or maybe it was a couple of nights ago, about classical economists thinking, basically modeling humans as automata.
Yeah.
And that's this computational move.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very explicit. They refer to us as Homo economicus.
Yeah.
Right. This is.
Yes,
I think that's an example of.
No. It's also important. I think it's contemporary economics, because economics was not always.
No, not always, but now, yeah.
That way. But now it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that the description of human activity through these economic lenses already reduces our activity to a kind of a combinatoric strategy. Yeah. But then, I was describing Lyotard's disagreement with Frankfurt School, and for Lyotard, the critical stance of Frankfurt School, which is advocated by Frankfurt School, is not enough because it doesn't give us a good philosophy of culture. Because we may be critical and still we are going to erase the heterogeneity of culture in the name of central contradiction. So that's the reason why Lyotard in the postmodern condition decides that he's going to describe what he calls the social in terms of Wittgensteinian language games. And that led him to the picture given in his major book, The Different, Phrases in Dispute in the American title. And this book is with a kind of analytic framework, which is both Austin-minded and Wittgenstein-minded. But in postmodern condition, it's more Wittgenstein-minded, and in The Different is more Austin-minded, although the name of Wittgenstein is also celebrated. So in Lyotard's description of the book The Different, culture is described as dominated by tension between what he calls phrase regimes and phrase genres. And more or less, phrase regimes are connected with local type of actions in the Austin sense. For example, there is the denotative, the declarative regime, and there is the prescriptive regime, other regimes also. And genres, it's the idea that we are saying a lot, we have sequences of phrases, and each phrase belongs to a regime, but through the sequence of our phrases, we are trying to reach a kind of gain. So every genre comes with a gain. For example, the theoretical genre is defined by is when we define the gain as truth. And then you have also two other genres, which is the economical genre and the Hegelian genre in the book. Economical genre is when the gain is to have an output which is greater than the input. And speculative genre or Hegelian genre means that the gain is, I'm not going to say much about it, but it's technically the Aufhebung. Say more, but I think it's not necessary here. So in The Different, Lyotard is describing culture in a way as divided between regimes and genres, but there is no central contradiction. He doesn't keep the central contradiction feature, even if he keeps Marx's vision of a kind of fraud or a kind of injustice which is built in the rules of capitalism. He keeps that, but he doesn't keep the contradiction feature. So much for the brief history of philosophy of culture I announced to you. And from the trajectory I went through, I retained three things. First thing is that it's this idea which I introduced through hermeneutic tradition, and especially through Dilthey, which is that regions of culture illustrate local meanings. We perceive some layer as an autonomous component of culture each time we are able to associate a local meaning to this region. So if that much is true, then any conception of culture has to be grounded in a conception of meaning, because it's through our understanding of meaning that we are able to distinguish between components of culture. And according to what I read in Eric Schliesser's beautiful paper, I think it seems that Philip Kitcher thinks still in that way. He thinks that every component of culture is associated to a specific meaning, local meaning, while Schliesser doesn't approve that, if I understood him well. So the second point is that culture is very often read in the light of the Latin origin in the verb colere. Our culture is what we cultivate. And then if we follow this insight, culture is simply the observable result of our complex and multifaceted symbolic practice. And then the third point is that there is another possible approach which grasps culture at the level of the infinite paths it offers. So now I come to a section which is called the plot of meaning, where so I'm going to tell you a bit more about my approach of meaning. Because I go with the Diltheian assumption, or the assumption of hermeneutics, that districts of culture are regions of meaning. But I have to understand better how regions of meaning may occur. And for that, I need a different notion of meaning. So I'm going to say a bit more about the contemporary issue of meaning for contemporary philosophy. So in my 2001 book, Sens et philosophie du sens, so meaning and philosophy of meaning, I sustain that we don't have yet a true philosophy of meaning. And by such a phrase, I mean, we don't have yet a philosophy which grants meaning the master position. So what is presented as philosophy of meaning doesn't give meaning the master position. So it happens so because meaning is understood as meaning of. And therefore, meaning always depends on what fills the three dots. And what fills the three dots is a being, something which is an entity. And this being is supported by being with great B as a general category or event. So what I have in mind here by speaking of any being as supported by being with little b is supported by being with great B, what I have in mind is Heidegger, Tugendhat, and Davidson. Heidegger, he says that we usually forget that for anything to be rightly considered as something which is a being with little b, it has to undergo the event of being. If we call something a being, it's because something happens to what we are naming a being. It happens that this being is. So we should hear the verbal content of being behind any substantive being. So that's the main point of Heidegger. And I thought, because I remember that in 2022, Jose was extremely reluctant to what the distinction between being with great B and being with little b. I had thought of possibilities of bringing him closer to this vision. And I had thought that to see the distinction of the verbal component of meaning and the substantive component of meaning as essential to any good linguistics, it may be a Californian view, for example, because it was the view of Langacker, who was teaching in Stanford. So he published two important books called Cognitive Grammar in 1987 and 1991. And his conviction was that in order to understand meaning, he was formerly a member of the Chomskyan school, but then he invented his own linguistics, and he was convinced that in order to describe meaning in a more accurate way, we have to base our description on the distinction between verbal content and substantive content. Then Tugendhat, he was a student of Heidegger in Germany, but then he emigrated. And he had to, and he came to Argentina, where he became an important philosopher, a famous philosopher, and he tried to translate Heidegger in a language understandable by an analytic philosopher. And so he in his description, which is given in a very important, very good book, which is called Selbstbewusstsein und Selbstbestimmtheit. So in this book, it says that we simply have to retain the contrast between the proposition and the name, because the name refers to an individual in the world, while the proposition claims to be true, exactly like in Giovanni Sambin's definition. So a proposition is facing reality in the expectation that it will be either coined as true or as false. And this opening of the alternative between true and false would be exactly what Heidegger had in mind when he was speaking of being with great B. So to be honest, in Heidegger, there is another approach, which is that in every period of history, of philosophy, there is a prevailing interpretation of a conceptual property, which is the conceptual property shared by all existing things. So the being with great B is replaced by a conceptual content. And for Heidegger, in ancient period, the conceptual content which replaces being as an event is permanence, something which not only to exist means to be permanent, to show the same figure in an ongoing duration. And then in this vision of Heidegger, then comes the second interpretation of being with great B, with a conceptual property, which is that anything which counts as an entity has to be object for a subject representing this object. So that's the modern vision of being with great B, reduced to a conceptual content. And then there is the last interpretation of being with great B, which would be the contemporary one for Heidegger, and it's associated in Heidegger with the epoch of technique. And here, an entity is something that we put aside in order to produce an effect on the basis of this something which has been put aside. So in German, it's Bestand. So you see, in Heidegger, you have this interpretation as being as a quality of verbality, supporting anything which is counted as an entity. And you have also this general historical picture defining at least three great periods in human history where being with great B is replaced by a conceptual property. Then in Tugendhat, I told you, and then I think that also, you know, that there is a discussion of Davidson about how we should logically translate propositions expressing an action. It's in the book Actions and Events. And here in this book, Davidson claims that each time we have a proposition which expresses an action, this action has to be understood in terms of an underlying event. So instead of saying that John is eating the cake, I should say there is an event which identifies with the eating of a cake by John. And in this vision, we are sensitive to the fact that any action is not a static predication of stable entities. It tells the story of an event, and we have to quantify over the event before identifying the event with a certain structure of subject of an object. So I think in its own way, Davidson thinks that he has to refer propositions to events, at least in the case of action propositions. So that's, I think, the general idea of this paragraph was that if we understand meaning as meaning of, then we are going to subordinate meaning to ontology, to our understanding of what is.
And what is a meaning without of?
Well, I'm going to say a bit more about it, but give me some time for that. More precisely, I criticize what I call the referential intentional conception of meaning, which has been shared, I think, by Frege and Husserl. So I show you the diagram. So here is Frege's vision of meaning. Meaning, you know, a meaning of Aristotle is given by the linguistic expression Plato's pupil, because it's a mode of presentation of Aristotle.
Are you speaking of Sinn or Bedeutung? What is the relation of meaning?
Yeah, I'm speaking about Sinn here.
Sinn, okay.
It's mode of presentation mode.
Okay, okay.
So I describe it more precisely by, in Frege, you have a linguistic expression, you have the era of reference, and then you have the object. So Aristotle, Plato's pupil, and here reference era. And then what he calls meaning is the presentation mode which lies in the linguistic expression. It means that we have to consider the linguistic expression, and what we call meaning is the linguistic expression as transfigurating by the referential arrow. That's exactly his notion. And then in Husserl, you have something quite similar, which is that you have consciousness, you have the arrow of intentionality, and you have the object, which is not the external object, but the noema. And what you call meaning is the intended object as intended in Husserl's formulation, which means that you consider the object as transfigurating by the intentional arrow. So I wrote referential, it was wrong. It has to be intentional here. And that the two notions are almost the same, has been seen by many scholars. And one of them was David Woodruff Smith, who attended the 2022 part of this seminar.
By the way, did you inform him that you were here?
No, I didn't.
This was an error.
I should have done it. You're right. But I was shy.
Why?
Which is never a good idea. But very often mine. So I'm going to suggest a different approach of meaning, which is inspired by Emmanuel Levinas.
So the point of Frege that you want to do is for Frege nothing as a Sinn if as not a Bedeutung. So look at Sinn under the idea of the mode of presentation of the Bedeutung. If we eliminate Bedeutung, no Sinn.
Yeah.
Is what you want to say.
Yes, that's what I say. And in the case of Husserl, if nothing is intended, you don't have meaning.
Yes, but I say a square circle, do I have intention of Bedeutung? Still I have a Sinn. Exactly because I have a Sinn that I can see that there is no intention of Bedeutung.
Yeah, well, this is just discussed in these schools. I agree. Then you have the. But I think that the case of Husserl shows that it's not that important the distinction between a real object and an intentional object, because anyway meaning is subordinated to this object, whether it's claimed to exist or only to be intended. So here is the vision of meaning, which is inspired by Emmanuel Levinas. If we follow Emmanuel Levinas' vision, the guiding circumstance concerning meaning is address. So the guiding circumstance is a message reaches me and demands me. It means that I have to relaunch the message, and relaunching the message means exactly the same as understanding the message. But I cannot do it in whichever way. I have to relaunch the message as it requires to be, because the message is demanding on me. So that's the idea of meaning, which I symbolize with this different diagram. You have the message, it reaches me, it addresses me, it asks something of me, it exerts a demand on me, and I am relaunching, which is the same as understanding the message. I answer something.
So what is the meaning here? Sorry, it's not clear.
Well, the meaning, I am going to claim that in my relaunching, the meaning is expressed.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's also not too far away from what maybe what Giovanni says, right?
What?
Giovanni, like he said,
yeah.
we cannot completely detach the meaning of mathematics from mathematicians interacting.
All his reference to conversation sounds in that way to me, but I'm not sure he would accept this.
Yeah, I'm also not sure.
Probably
so
not.
And this schema meaning would not be meaning of.
No, meaning is meaning that I express because I was reached by a message, and I relaunch something, and in this relaunching is my
relaunching something. I do something. I utter an expression. I make a jest. And this is what is the meaning of. So if I relaunching to your message, I say, oh, the meaning is the meaning of this.
No,
so I do not see in which sense there is no meaning of.
It's the other way around.
It's the expression as answer. It's the expression which is my relaunching as answer to the demand. That's what that would be the new vision of the meaning. And so this meaning, you cannot locate it in the reality of the words, in the physical reality of the words, or in your gesture.
Mm-hmm.
No, I do not understand.
Like, a picture that came to my mind was I'm teaching in my class.
Yeah.
And all the students are looking in their laptops. Nobody is looking at it. So I send a message and I don't relaunch it.
Yeah.
It's terrible. And I would conclude from it that there is no understanding.
So
there's no meaning.
In the academic situation, we get the meaning when we read the papers they write at the end of the course. Well, in the best case.
Yeah, but for me, I don't want to wait that long.
You don't have the living dialogue situation. That's for sure. So then I come to the description of my personal philosophy, which is etho-analysis. So I try to understand what can we call sharing a meaning. What is a share of meaning? And etho-analysis wants to describe that. He wants to describe the meaning which is shared in any region of culture, which is going to be a region of meaning. So I think if you follow the referential intentional conception of meaning, then to share a meaning means that you share the same filter in the approach of such and such reality. For example, you have the class of people who are seeing Aristotle as Plato's pupil, and you have the other class of people who are seeing Aristotle as preceptor of Alexander. So these are two meanings, and so to share a meaning, it means to share the same filter in the approach of Aristotle in that case. But if you switch for the conception of meaning following the if we switch for the address conception of meaning, then to share a meaning means co-welcoming some stakes or appeals. The same demands reach us, all of us, and we share the responsibility towards the incoming demand. So we are the followers of the same demand.
So it means that we are upset at the same time, happy at the same time, for example?
Not necessarily, but we share a concern. I agree with that description. We are co-requested by the same demand, to reformulate it.
So what are we following? We are followers of what?
Yeah, I'm going to say more about it.
Okay.
But for the moment, I only need to think that there is an incoming demand.
Right.
Then I'm saying more about it.
But the incoming demand is there independently of me? No. So if I go, I pass in front to a statue, I cannot see it or not notice it. If I notice it, the statue, in some sense, is asking me to appreciate it or not. If I even do not see it, the messages.
So I think it's better that we go through this slide because you are giving a perceptive example, and my approach is a bit different. I think that the incoming demand comes through the shared language. We share a language, that's a presupposition, and within this language, some words convey calls. So these words are words that cannot be reduced to recruiting individual illustrations in the world. So if you look at these words as names, recruiting the individuals coming under the concept evocated by the name, the noun, it doesn't work well. You don't really capture our use of these words. And so we share a language, and some words convey a call. I call these words solicitators. I remember that first time I was trying to tell that in English, I used solicitors. And a Canadian friend told me that it cannot be used because there is this confusion with a lawyer. So he told me that I should use solicitor.
So it's a word you invented for that purpose?
No, he told me.
Oh, he told you.
He told me there is this word solicitor.
Yeah.
I believed him, but I don't know.
So could a solicitor also be a
Let's see.
gesture instead of a word?
Let us believe Google, that is much more cultivated than your friend.
I did hear the question.
A gesture instead of a word, like if I point at something.
No, in my picture, it comes with the shared language. So the presupposition of any region of culture, any share of meaning, is that we share a language.
Yeah, but I'm asking whether the language could be gestures instead of words.
So No, what I name language is the usual language.
Yeah, there's interesting work by Tomasello. He's a primatologist, and he wrote about where does language comes from. And one of the methods he uses to answer this question is working with chimpanzee babies and human babies, and then he compares how they learn language. And he spent a lot of time studying sign language gestures because it happens earlier. And he says this idea. So he says the difference between human babies and chimpanzee babies is he calls it shared intentionality. And he says you can make experiments like pointing somewhere where you can, even with very small young babies, see a difference. And I think this idea of shared intentionality, that is what I was reminded of when you explained to us what the solicitators are.
So I want to distinguish two things. If we are thinking genealogically, I'm completely okay for seeing that gesture as the origin of any utterance. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
But then what I am describing is how we receive calls, which we may share. And I think these calls, which we may share and which we are going to pursue through infinite paths, these calls are conveyed by a language which is given and which is going to be the framework of everything I locate inside culture. Solicitators are words of ideality rather than extensional words, because as I told you, they cannot be reduced to recruiting the individuals, counting as examples of the concepts they formulate.
So if now, but then you are solicited by me. There's a word that has no, I do not want to refer to anything. But you say, you was certainly solicited.
Yeah.
And I say that doesn't clear my reaction.
No.
That's what you mean? So there is no intentional reference.
No, you were suggesting that your shouting was a kind of solicitator.
Exactly.
Well,
a word that solicited him, at least.
Yes,
Apart from
yes.
you, himself.
Well, usually when I hear someone shouting, I rather understand it as extensional. I think he's pointing at something in the world. But then, in order to have this notion of a word which conveys a call, I need a more common word. But then here is my example, my favorite example, and I thought it would be pedagogical, but experimentally it was not most of the time. It's the word love, because I think that the word love doesn't usually refer to love episodes or love objects. We rather use love in order to indicate that love is in the air. I'm using Phil Collins, as you said.
But then
well-known philosopher of culture.
Then we have also a point here. But then it's not the meaning of love, or the word love that you are describing. So that's this idea that solicitator are words.
No way.
Does not reduce your
you
idea
are
of
always
meaning to the
focusing
idea of the meaning of word.
you are always focusing on the possible ontological equation. So I'm not interested in that. I think that the word love as a word of the common language, which is shared by everyone, is able to convey a call. And so I can claim to be a follower of the call of love. So then
I continue not to understand in which sense, in this way, you avoid the idea that the meaning is the meaning of the solicitor.
Well, for the moment, I didn't say a word about the meaning. I described the situation of being requested.
But you began to say, I want to
Yeah,
as an alternative to the idea that the meaning and meaning of.
Yeah, I see the meaning in the light of the address. So the meaning is going to be expressed in a relaunching, but it has to. The precondition of that is that something has been incoming as a demand. So I'm relaunching as the message requires me to relaunch. And in that way, I express a meaning, but there is nothing stable here, because someone can tell me that I relaunched in a wrong way. I was not faithful to the demand. And then myself, I can make a new second relaunching and so on. So, but the idea is that this little story tells the story of meaning and tells more about meaning than the presentation mode story. So then I come to ethoses, because the idea is that around solicitors, ethoses are arranged. Ethoses, it's the group of people listening to the same call or committed to the same stakes. And such groups should not in general be considered as social organisms. They don't build communities, to use another contemporary famous word. So, for example, people following the call of love do not build a community. Although in Schiller's poetry, Hymne an die Freude, Schiller seems to say the contrary, because, you know, there is this quotation which I find awful, where he says in the poetry, und wer's nie gekonnt, der stehle, weinend sich aus diesem Grund. So, who never knew that, and it's the call of love. He has to go away like a thief, crying out of this circle, and so this means that for him, for Schiller, the love-abiding people, they built a community, and someone who is not part of it is going to be rejected by that community. I dislike very much this picture as much as I love the poetry and the symphony. But
Beethoven.
What?
The symphony?
Yeah, Beethoven.
Yeah.
So, but I think in general, we are perfectly able to understand that for people, followers of a call, do not build a community. And so in the case of science, science is the organization of a community of scholars pursuing the truth. But it's not always the case.
I think that it's true that you, as a lot of people, over-evaluate the notion of truth. Truth does do much less than what you think it does.
What? A lot of people?
I think it's true that over-evaluate the truth.
So I'm going to say more about it, but I see truth as a solicitor. Conveys a call. Well, there is a long history of that. Then I would say that ethoses have a geographic and a historical facet, because there is a special dispersion of people sharing the same concern, of followers of the call. And there is also a historical aspect of ethoses, because when you are part of an ethos, or when you are a follower of an ethos, you try to transmit the call from your generation to the next one. So if you see ethoses in that way, you cannot but recognize that each ethos is a contingent tradition, because people are following or trying to follow, but they could stop. And the ethos is going to last as long as people keep on referring to what should be done in order to level up with the stakes indicated by the solicitor. So I gave you the example of love as an ethos, because the call which is received by the word love is to have a relationship which would level up with the stakes of love. And there is a book which was written in English language by Aldous Huxley, which describes the death of the ethos of love. It's the Brave New World, because in Brave New World, as you know, not all people have completely forgotten this whole myth of love, of the love relationship. They behave completely differently, and everything is made in their society in order to prevent the fidelity to the call of love to reappear. That's exactly what is described in Aldous Huxley's book. So it's very important for me that each ethos is a contingent tradition. And then I come to Sanson's. Etho-analysis is a new kind of philosophical inquiry. It tries to perform the etho-analysis of all ethoses. And, to perform the etho-analysis of an ethos is to make explicit a list of prescriptions unfolding the call. So the word love is a solicitor, which means that it counts as a call for in our experience, in our linguistic experience. It means that we receive that there is something to be done in order to answer the call. And etho-analysis simply tries to make explicit all the prescriptions that we should follow in order to answer to the call of love, for example, in the case of the ethos of life. Love.
But it is what you say. It's all that the thing does not concern the word. Because if I came here and they said, "Love," okay, this is crazy, this man. You are not. There is no address. I go here, love, love, love. It's not the concept of love that you want to speak. Why you should speak?
No, it's not the sound. It's receiving the meaning of love. Yes.
So it's not the word then.
No, it's not the word. That's not the sound, at least. It's a function of language. Language conveys love as expressing a call.
So language conveys love by. Yeah, we come back by expressing the meaning.
By
expressing the meaning.
I don't know. I'm not sure that that it's the meaning of love. This proper name doesn't make sense for me.
Okay, but I do not know. I do not know.
Language supports love in such a way that I can hear in love a call.
I do not know how love is said in Chinese. I suppose, right? Or you know love in Chinese?
No, but I think.
Okay, if I pronounce the Chinese word for love, there is no solicitation.
No,
here.
no.
Why?
You have the presupposition of a shared language. So I cannot hear a solicitor.
Exactly, because every share the language, the community that shares this language attach meaning to the words.
Yeah,
the word work as solicitor exactly because they have a meaning.
I don't deny that there is a connection with the meaning, but I think that to reduce this value of the word to the meaning of the word, it's not correct, because there is more than this. It's the general use of the word.
I agree that it's more than this. But what I want to say is that because of their meaning, they can work in this way.
well, you want to attribute anything to the meaning as something. I don't feel the need of that. I understand sufficiently that our common language uses love in such a way that I hear in the word love more than a common noun. I hear a call. The whole story is a story of how signification works between humans. I agree with that. I don't have to pinpoint something which is the big hero of the story. I don't need it. So
it's you that you want to eliminate the big hero by saying that there's no meaning of. So this is, I'm reacting to this because they do not understand this point. I'm not criticizing you. Simply they do not understand why.
Yeah, I understand that you don't understand, but I think that there is no chance that you are going to understand because you are reluctant, and very often you are that kind of person. You try to say what you understand and what your framework of thinking is, and you are not able to receive something a different framework. As such, I've seen that 1,000 times, but okay. Anyway, I think in order to understand better, I would have to show you the etho-analysis of words. So here is my result. So I see 7 injunctions as building the sentence of love. It means they unfold the call which is conveyed by the word love. So the first one says, achieve a syncategorematic conjunction of sexuality and friendship. So I can comment a bit of that. You know that I don't know how to formulate that in English, but I'm going to use the French. Forgive me for that. We know that there is a big difference in French when the adjective comes after the noun or when it comes before the noun. Because when the adjective comes after the noun, then it means that what is referred to by the complete expression is the intersection of what is referred to by the noun and what is referred to by the adjective. For example, homme grand, it's everything which is both human and tall. Mm-hmm. And but if you say grand homme, if you put the adjective before, then it allows a syncategorematic production of meaning, which is going to be a meaning which is something else, which overcomes at the same time tall and human in such a way as to build the meaning of grand homme. Well, then you could discuss about who is a grand homme.
Just to refresh my memory, syncategorematic has incomplete meaning, or there's a
no, it's a meaning which is a function of the connection between independent things. Okay. And categorematic, it's a meaning which goes by itself.
So it's not the intersection, but the function.
Yeah. So here you understand better. Achieve a syncategorematic conjunction of sexuality and friendship. It's the idea that love should be something which overcomes sexuality and friendship, both, without being simply the intersection of both. The second injunction is redefine the whole of life as a function of love. I think it is requested by the call of love that an individual life enjoying a love relationship should be redefined in all its aspects by the love condition. I'm going to give you another example, which is a film of Wim Wenders, which is Paris, Texas. Mm-hmm. And in this film, the hero, at some point, he says that he had a love relationship with the character of the actress played by Natasha Kinski. And he says that he remembers that with her, it was a completely different experience to shop in a supermarket. I think it's a good illustration of what I mean here. But then you can see redefining the whole of life in this way, that every compartment of life is going to be redefined by the love context. But you can also see that love is meant to embrace the whole of time. The third injunction is be sexually faithful. The fourth injunction is consider the genesis of your love as a seduction, which means that not only we may, in some cases, interpret our love as originating in a seduction, but we have to place an imperative chemistry at its origin. And then the fifth one is the one I prefer. It's give the beloved one an infinite attention that turns to every detail, no matter how miserable, of their fabulous particularity.
But that is disjunctive or conjunctive, so there is either one or the other.
No, we have to follow all injunctions.
Sorry?
We have to follow all injunctions.
So love for a son is not a love in the sense of consider. There is no for my son.
Love, no, I'm focusing on romantic love.
Okay.
To use American categories. The sixth one is welcome and experience an extraordinary present, protected from the ecstatical. So I'm not going to explain that much, but I think that it's connected, it's required by the call of love that being in love, we experience a protected present. It can create for followers a present which is not going to be disrupted by our aiming at something, or aiming at the future, anything of that kind. And the seventh is that you have to live your love as warranted by your subjective experience. It means that the call of love asks you to believe in the performativity of the I love you. So this was an example of etho-analysis. I'm going to give you another example further. So it's very clear that prescriptions of so the list of the sentence builds a kind of table of the law of love, a local table of the law. But the one which was given by Moses is not the same at the same time. But still, I'm universalizing Moses. So prescriptions of the list do not have to be actually obeyed. The point is not that people are really doing that. It's that each follower of the ethos should agree a posteriori that if he transgresses the commands, he gives up in a way the stakes evoked by the solicitor. So each follower of the ethos of love would agree that if he or she transgresses any of the command, he or she diminishes love. And another way of formulating that is that the list of the sentence axiomatizes the local value generated by the ethos. So the sentence is creating a value, and the value is defined by these prescriptions, which means that the text of the sentence is a kind of axiomatic stipulation which defines the stakes of the value of love, for example. And this value may sometimes escape the ethical measure, because it's not because we have an ethos that this ethos is ethical. I insist on that, because the language may transmit a call through a word without this call being includable in the ethical perspective. I don't claim that any ethos is by definition part of ethics. I think truth is not part of ethics, in a way.
It's not part of?
I think that the ethos of truth is not part of ethics, it's something else. It's another fidelity. And we know that in the case of love very well, because you know there is this proverb, which is that in love, everything is permitted, which is a way to say, over a bit disguised way, that you may transgress ethics in the name of love.
All is fair in love and war. All is permitted in love and in war.
Okay. So it's a good generalization.
It's another ethos.
And a good comparison. So I think now yes, I'm back to infinite paths. So how does etho-analysis provide a philosophy of meaning? It provides a philosophy of meaning by unveiling cultural components within which one may pursue horizons in an unlimited way. So when I was mentioning infinite paths, I had always in mind infinite paths which are answering to a call, which to a solicitor. As follower of ethoses, we have to level to stakes. We have to comply with obligations. We are connected to infinite tasks. And these tasks are unlimited because they unfold an arbitrary deep interpretation of how we come to satisfy in a concrete way the injunctions of the senses. So if you come back to all the 7 injunctions of my sentence of love, you are going to see that each of these injunctions may be satisfied in many, many ways. And we have to interpret the best way to do that at each moment. And we are never quit with that. If you are a follower of the ethos of love, you know that you are going to have to find the best behavior in order to answer the call of love at every moment of your future. So in this way, etho-analysis connects the vision of cultural districts as associated to particular meanings with the normative vision of culture as offering infinite paths. Because we know within each ethos, we know in advance that any finite achievement is not going to count as enough. So this seems to cut culture as usually understood. It seems to extract a part from a culture. It's the part of these infinite paths answering solicitors. We are, or in another language, we are only considering in culture the vectorized part. What we experience as calls conveyed by shared language, which are going to be translated, thanks to etho-analysis, as local laws. So should we contrast this level of ethoses with culture in the line of the colere? I mean, with the text, with the set of available text symbols or routines. This would be a distinction not far from the old distinction between culture and civilization. You know, some people, they say that civilization, Sittlichkeit would be, is the actual description of what people are doing. And culture, Kultur, would be the normative part of culture. So do we have to make this confrontation between the objective, actual part of culture and the normative one. I think that with human experience, we see that it's not possible to separate both layers, because human experience is such that the vectorized part holds actual available treasure of culture. So you cannot really understand any symbol or any symbolic habit without coming back to what is asked, but without coming back to requirements, horizons, or tasks. So in a way, the level of infinite paths is pervasive in culture, even in what we can describe as a given culture. So etho-analysis doesn't dispense us nor sever us from patient archaeology of data. It rather enriches this archaeology, because we have to describe data, but we cannot do that without hearing the perspectives which lie behind data. So that's enough for today. So I leave the last part for the final session.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.